Hi, I'm Kristen, and this is the Simple Handmade Everyday Podcast, where I talk about living a creative, intentional life. I like to chat about quilting, knitting, cross-stitching, what I'm reading and watching, and a little bit about self-care, productivity, and keeping a cozy, organized home. I've got my cup of tea in hand, so grab yours and let's settle in for a chat. This is episode 98. Hello, welcome back, or welcome to you new listeners. It's good to be back. Grab a cup of tea or coffee or sparkling water or wine and let's settle in for a chat. I once again have this Harney & Sons black currant tea. My daughter gave me a tin of it for Christmas, and they have these very high quality tea bags which have real loose leaf tea in them. And I blew through those so fast that I had to buy my own. So I went to buy some more, and I ended up buying a pound of loose leaf black currant tea because it was by far the best deal, even though it did feel like a bit of a splurge. I think it would last forever, and I'm just storing it in the tin that my little tea bags came in. And this tea with a little splash of milk in it is just, it's so good. And I drink a cup in the afternoon, and I feel like that little splash of milk kind of in some ways gives it more body and fills me up, so I sometimes don't even think about getting a snack. So what a tablespoon of milk will do in your cup of tea. So I'm really enjoying that. So you should definitely check that out if you are a tea fan. I shared this with my friend Stephanie over at Make and Decorate with Stephanie, and she agrees that it is delicious. So, how's it going? Let's see. We're here coming in. Well, this is being recorded on January 22nd, 2023. And I'm coming out on the other side of all the rain in Southern California. It was intense. It was crazy. Now, where I live, there were no issues with flooding. Not in my town. Kind of surrounding areas had some issues. And there was some real flooding of the strawberry fields near us. Where I live, I don't live in Central California where a lot of the strawberries come from, but I do live in strawberry territory down here. And I was reading an article yesterday about how a river in Ventura overflowed its banks and just devastated a bunch of strawberry fields, which is such a bummer. We start getting strawberries locally grown here in February, and I just don't think that's going to happen this year. So that's sad. But oh my gosh, everything is so green. Even we let our lawn go because of the drought. We stopped watering it, and I'm looking out the window. It's, 70% green. It's like it's creeping back. It's kind of amazing. My husband and I went for a hike. We vowed to hike while it's green. Went for a long hike this morning, which is why I'm recording this actually a little bit late because I wasn't sure I had the energy to do it. But that's one of our goals, is to get out and hike, at least, hopefully once a week, while everything is green and beautiful. So that's been something that I've been looking forward to. And that's kind of the thing that's going through my head as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you guys about in this intro. And that is how important it is to have things that you're looking forward to as we get in here into the sort of the depths of winter, where life can be very much the same. And I was thinking about, my husband and I, we are such creatures of routine. We make dinner and do the dishes, and he takes the dog for a walk, and I make the coffee, and then I've got my pajamas on by 7:30 every night, settle in by 8 o'clock with my cross-stitch project and my cozy mystery show to watch, and stitch until 10 and go to bed and do it all over the next day. And I was thinking about okay, I need something to break this up. So luckily, I've got some stuff coming up to look forward to. First of all, for some reason, I just all of a sudden, I have a pretty good sort of rotation of seeing all my friends in person. But so, right now I've got over the next month, coffee dates, a lunch date, a dinner date. I went and had just wine after dinner with a friend one day. And I got to tell you that all those little social engagements just really, really fill me up. So I'm very glad that I'm kind of making making the time, prioritizing being social, because after COVID, it was a little bit of a hard sell to get me back out and seeing people in person again. I can really just hole up in the house and never leave. So that's been good. We've got a trip to San Diego coming up, just to go down for the day. One of my kids is having a birthday, so we'll spend the day there, and that's always fun. And then in February, I've got a work trip to Orlando, Florida. There will not be a Disney trip. On the end of that is just purely a work trip. And then at the end of February, I'm going to QuiltCon. I'm so excited. QuiltCon's in Atlanta this year, and I've got an Airbnb booked with some quilty friends. And I have not been to a QuiltCon in so many years, not since they stopped having them in Pasadena. So I'm so excited about that. So kind of just a lot of nice social things on the calendar, which feels like, wow, this is kind of getting out there. This is a lot. So I hope that you guys have something to look forward to too. I think it's so easy to get caught in such a rut. So think about just extending that social network. There's a whole series in the New York Times recently about how important it is to have a social life. And you could take a little quiz about how your social life was. And then they had all these articles that just came out about, the importance of making, dates to see friends and just getting out and about. So anyways, with that, let's head into our quilty segment. Once again, I would like to thank the Fat Quarter Shop for sponsoring the podcast. They are the absolute best. Fat Quarter Shop is a one-stop show for quilting fabrics and supplies for quilters around the world. They stock quilt shop quality fabrics, pre-cuts, quilt kits, patterns, notions, and even cross-stitch supplies. What I wanted to talk to you today about are all of the myriad of quilt-alongs that the Fat Quarter Shop does. I don't even know how they keep them straight, but they have so many going on to fit any kind of style or kind of schedule that you would have for yourself. So there is, of course, the 2023 Charity Quilt-Along to benefit the Make-A-Wish Foundation. I talked about that last time. I am partaking in So Scrappy Spools. I'll talk about that a little bit more. There's a Jolly Bar 4, their new little book, Jolly Ball Volume 4. They're doing a quilted along for that, and I was so tempted to jump in on that one, and I still might. They grabbed different blocks from that book and turned it into one beautiful quilt. There's the ongoing Socialites quilt along, and which has these blocks designed by different designers. And then Kimberly Jolly does a tutorial video every week to show how to do those blocks. So if you want to kind of extend your skills and learn some good tips and tricks, nobody teaches quilting better than Kimberly Jolly. So that's the Socialites. And even though they're, on like block 12 or something, it's never too late to jump on board with that, because those instructional videos, they live forever on YouTube. And then, of course, there's the upcoming Designer Mystery Quilt Along. So head over to the Jolly Jabber, which is the blog for the Fat Quarter Shop, and they have a section for quilt alongs, also stitch alongs, and I bet you will find something inspiring to jump into. The reason I like quilt alongs is I just feel like it gives you that community. It kind of gets you into your sewing room, which is good for me to go, okay, what are the blocks I need to do this week or this month? You can share what you're doing with other people, and you see other people doing the same quilts in different color palettes and patterns. And I feel like that is very inspirational. And I learned some things about, I really like that. I wouldn't have thought to put that together. And then you see things you don't like. So it's all educational. So I highly recommend that you check that out. I'll put a link to the Jolly Jabber Quilt Alongs page in the show notes, so you might want to check it out. All right, let's talk quilting. I got my sewing space set up again after the holidays. I got my sewing machine out, and it has been working fine. I don't know what its problem was before, but it is so nice to have my space set up again. So what got me back in sewing was I'm reaching over to get the pattern here, the So Scrappy Spools quilt along. The quilt is designed by Lori Holt. Apparently, I think it was just a quilt that she made for fun many years ago and has sort of been meaning to write a pattern ever since. So it's So Emma, which is the pattern arm of Fat Quarter Shop, published this great pattern, and does it have page numbers on it? It's an 18-page pattern. It's just beautifully written and illustrated, and it's meant to be a scrap buster. And so I'm joining in the first, I think you have like a month to make the first 2 blocks. And the first one is just a 4-patch, and the next one is a little log cabin. I've talked about this last time that I wasn't really sure what I was going to do for background or for the spool ends, but it turns out you put all those on at the end. So I'm just making these 5.5-inch blocks for now, and I'll figure the rest out later. I learned a few things making this. First of all, so I went through my stash. I don't really have scraps so much. In 2020, I really, again, went through my fabric, and I went there. I think I had 2 big black garbage bags full of scraps, and I donated everything, all the fabric I didn't want, and all the scraps to a local quilt guild who I know will put them to good use. So it was just like, I'm done. So I don't really have scraps, but I do have, as I've talked about many times, my stash, which I vow to want to use. I do love those fabrics. I've culled them enough that they really are fabrics I like, and they're sorted by color. And they are mostly fat quarters and smaller. So, for many people, that's just a scrap stash. So I'm using those. So I went through and I kind of pulled a palette that I liked, and I wish I'd brought it in here. But it's very, it's like navy and aqua and some red and pink. I think there's a little bit of kind of a goldy yellow. I don't think there's any green. So I think that's kind of it. So I guess in a way it's kind of a red, white, and blue plus a little yellow. And so I just pulled a bunch of fabrics. I had to pull out this other tray of fabrics that I'd pulled. I talked about doing a quilt that just with low volume squares, and then the corners are just different colors. And they were all going to be blues, 2 kinds of blues and greens, I think, basically. So I pulled a lot of my favorites in the blues category out already. So I had to find that. And so I just pulled all these fabrics, and then, started cutting to make these blocks, of which I needed like 4 to make just this 4-patch. And the squares were 3 inches. And then on the log cabin, they were 1.5-inch strips of different lengths. And I learned something very quickly, and this is why I think I've never been a great scrap quilter, is that when you have to, if you're not really working from scraps, you need to pull this fabric, and then you do need to cut out these little fussy bits from them, right? Like, and it's hard to make yourself, like for, let's say I'm going to make 4 patches. So I need 16 little squares of fabric, and I don't want them all to be identical. I want it to kind of be scrappy, right? So I'm cutting out like out of 16 different fabrics, like these little 3-inch squares. It was just like this, there's got to be a better way. And that's why I figured out that people like Lori Holt and Bonnie Hunter have scrap saving systems, because you don't want to go into your stash and cut these little fussy bits. So I kind of realized this on the 4-patch block. So for the log cabin block, I just went through and pulled out a subset of all the fabrics I'd pulled and cut a bunch. It was actually 32 different fabrics. I cut 1.5-inch strips and just threw them all into a tray. And then when I went to go build my log cabins, then I started cutting them down to the right size, and that worked really well. So that inspired me to then go pull out the book that I talked about before. It is called Scrappiness is Happiness. It's the Lori Holt scrap book, and it's just like, it's a little pricey. I think it's about $35, but it is the best book. And first of all, it looks like a normal book on the front, but when you open it up, you see it's actually spiral bound inside, but it's hidden by this cover. And I like spiral bound books because they lay flat. And it's got 32 patterns for scrappy quilts in it. And at the beginning, she talks about her scrap system. And so before I cut all those 1.5-inch strips, I did flip through the pattern to see how many other blocks use 1.5-inch units. And there's a lot. And so that's why I felt like, okay, I'm just going to cut a bunch of these. And so then when I opened up her Scrappiness is Happiness book, she talks about that she has these little baskets of the sizes she uses the most. And so she does strips and squares, but I think, strips can easily be cut into squares. So if you just start with strips, you're in good shape. And she does them by 1.5 inches, 2.5 inches, 3.5 inches, and then 5-inch and 7-inch, which I think are more on squares than strips. And you'll notice that all those play together very nicely. And that's why she does those sizes. And I thought, okay, this is what I need to do is I need to, as I'm working through So Scrappy spools, start to cut a scrappy stash, because there are a couple quilts in Scrappiness is Happiness book at least a couple that I would like to do. First up is this Irish chain quilt that I just really like, even though I have my own pattern for an Irish chain. It's kind of similar. I still want to make hers. I love Irish chain quilts. They're just so simple and elegant. And so yeah, I think that this is what I'm going to do. So she shows a picture of how she stores her fabrics. And she just stores her scraps in these white bins, and they're just from Target. So the last time I was in Target, I picked up 5 of them, and they're not very deep. I'll put a link in the show notes. And I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to, and there's one for each of those sizes. And so I'm just going to try this system. I think that's having 5 of those baskets. I honestly don't know where I'm going to store them in my very small sewing area, but it's something I'm going to try. I also have to admit that one time I tried cutting things into the Bonnie Hunter system, which involves like squares and bricks, like rectangles. And I do think that this strip system is going to work a little bit better for me. And I am so determined to use the fabric that I have. And basically every quilt that I'm working on now is all fabric that I have. I haven't actually bought anything besides like background fabric for a while. And I think that's good for me to use what I have. So so that's what's happening. So Scrappy spools. Oh, and after I finished those 2 blocks, I was like, oh, this is so much fun. I remember how much I like sewing. And so I pulled out my granny square quilt that I started last summer and did not get very far on. And I know why. And it's because I'm using this fat quarter bundle that I have hoarded for 10 years. It's called Sweet Prairie. And I just love it when I just look at it. I love all the colors. It's kind of these pinks and peaches and reds and some greens and yellows and grays. And so when you sew a granny square quilt, and it's the Great Granny Square, it's also a Lori Holt pattern, and she does it with squares. I have sewn a granny square quilt before, and it was done with strip piecing, and that was so much easier. But because Lori Holt wants you to be working from your scrap stash and not from yardage, she has every little 2.5-inch square, you sew them all together. So it's a little painful, to be honest with you. But each one's like a little composition, because you have a center square and then surrounding that. So let's call that fabric A, and then around that is fabric B, and it just keeps moving out. So you use, is it 3? Let me look at it. It's, okay, so there's one center square that's different from the rest, and then 3 other colors that build out. And so every block's a little composition, sort of. And I'm just having trouble finding my groove of the fabric combinations with this line that I'm loving. I played around with it last night, and I think I've finished the blocks I had started before. I laid out 3 more. And I usually do 4 blocks at a time, but there are so many pieces to these that I was getting confused. So I was like, I'm going to stop at 3. So it's just been a little bit crazy there. But I can see if you had a good scrappy stash that this would be a great way to use that up. And it's making me want to pull out my Cabin Valley quilt, which is a modern log cabin. I've already made that once, but I gave it away and I want another one. So I kind of got my mojo back, and it's very exciting. So I did... And then, coming up with ways to organize things, kind of, when you're in there playing in your sewing room, it kind of rejuvenates you. So I got my little scrappy stash, plastic bins, and then while I was out, I went to Michael's and got 3 more of those. They're scrapbooking bins. It says on them that they're 12 by 12, but they're really 14 by 14, these little project bins, and they are such a perfect place to keep a whole project. And I needed a few more because I got some stuff going on now. And so I'm feeling a little bit more organized. Speaking of which, Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts just finished up this 21-day series on digging out of your sewing area, reorganizing your sewing area. My friend Vicky over at My Creative Corner 3 did it. She's going to kind of extend it to give her something to do for the whole winter. And doing my sewing room, reorganizing that really wasn't on my list of things to do this year, but watching those videos kind of made me think, oh man, I really should get in here and do some things. So I'm kind of thinking about ways that I would like to reorganize there. For a while, I thought I wanted to move my sewing room to my daughter's old room, the room I'm recording in right now. But I don't think that's going to happen because there's just really not space to do that. Plus, have bedrooms ready for the kids to come and visit. Then we have a loft, which is full of musical equipment. And my son was talking about moving his drums to the garage. So I was like, oh, I could someday that loft will be my craft space. But I got kind of excited about that, but realized, no, there's more than drums in that loft, and we'd have to find homes for all these things. So I'm going to just need to make the best of the dining room for a few more years. And so there's not a lot of storage space. So I'm just kind of thinking about ways that I can streamline that, stealing bookshelves from my son's room to see if I can have a little more storage space that way. So we'll see. But I've got some good, creative energy headed that way. And so I'll put a link in the show notes. But Karen Brown, I mean, she's so knowledgeable and she's such a pro. And she's, she built this whole DIY cutting station, with IKEA bookshelves. I know people have done it before. She kind of took it a different direction. And anyways, she's a real pro. So definitely check her out. And the other thing that you should check out, speaking of quilt-alongs, is my friend Frances Dowell over at Quilt Fiction. She's got that new Story Guild site, a membership site where, that she's writing quilty fiction and reading them as audiobooks. I'll put a link. I did it last time too. I'll put a link in the show notes, but she's doing a quilt along that goes along with the most recent Friendship album, 1934 Forget-Me-Not book. And it's a beautiful quilt, and there's different ways to join into that quilt along. You should definitely check that out. Oh, and one last thing. Last week I talked about some Aliso products. The ironing board cover and the wool pressing mats, and I've really been putting those through their paces in the last week here, and I cannot tell you how much I am loving those wool pressing mats and the fact that you can put them together and they stay together because they have these little rubber attachments that keep them together. So I talk all about that in the last episode, in episode 97, but absolutely loving those. All right, let's talk about some other crafty hobbies like cross stitch. I don't have a lot to report, although I stitch for a couple hours almost every night. I'm almost done with the Autumn Cottage chart by Plum Street Samplers. That has been so much fun to stitch. I'm stitching it on 28 count Lugana. I'm not really good at remembering the color, some kind of, craft paper brown color. And it's my first experience using fancy floss, like hand-dyed floss. And that has been really fun. I love the variegation. It's very subtle, but I'm loving the variegation in, like in places like the roof or, like bigger parts of it. There's this blue flower that is just beautiful, and I'm just loving the variegation in that. So I'll definitely be dipping my toe into that again. It's expensive. I think of cross stitches in some ways as being not a super expensive hobby, but once you get into the even weave and linen, those fabrics get more expensive. And, where floss is quite cheap, from places like Michael, you get into the hand-dyed floss and, they're like coming up on $3 a skein. It adds up quickly. So we'll have to just see where that goes. And when I'm done with that, I'll go back to Flea Market Flowers, which is a really big chart by Lori Holt. And, I'm realizing that despite the way all the floss tubers tend to stitch, I'm a monogamous stitcher. I just, I want to get into a pattern or just maybe two and just get it done. I just feel like if you're switching around like every day, I just don't find that enjoyable. I'm just more like, here I want, it's kind of same with quilting. Like I don't mind having a couple projects on the go, but I don't want 9 whips. I find that too overwhelming. So I'm still enjoying cross stitching, and it is such a nice thing to do in the evenings. Last night I after dinner I sewed for an hour and then cross stitched for an hour, and so it's a very, very nice way to spend the evenings this winter. Now, knitting wise, I've really not been knitting that much. As a matter of fact, I still have not even pulled out the wrap that my friend and I, we did this knitting with our daughters one night at this, we call it pub knitting, but it was really a winery, and it was too dark, and I know that there's at least 2 mistakes in it, and I need to rip that out before our next scheduled pub knitting. So I'm a little afraid to look at that. But I was sent 2 books, and I'm just going to review one today. This is called Knitting Wraps in the Round, 21 Inspired Shawls, Scarves, and Stoles. And it's by Andrea, it's going to be hard to pronounce, Bruneis, maybe, Brauneis, or Bruneis. And this is the most intriguing book. So there's a really good introduction to explain what the situation is here. And this is, so a wrap, it's usually a big flat object. It can be rectangular, it can be triangular, like that. And it can be just like a big scarf. So how do you knit those in the round? You knit it in the round with a row of steeking stitches. And if you don't know what steeking is, it is the technique I had only ever seen for sweaters. So again, and you do this so that you can knit it in the round. So say you knit a sweater in the round, body up or whatever, and you want to turn it into a cardigan. You have these steeking stitches, which is just a series of stitches. Sometimes let's just say it's 5 stitches. And what you do is you cut it right down that middle stitch, that 3rd stitch. And then you can knit a button band. There's all different ways to finish that. Of course, it's terrifying. It's terrifying to cut through something knitted, because you're going to imagine that the whole thing unravels immediately. That's what I see. I think it just completely unravels. But apparently, this is not necessarily what happens. So the reason you would want to knit these wraps in the rounds, and there's many gorgeous patterns with many gorgeous, colors and stitch patterns, is that things like color work and a lot of stitch patterns, in fact, are just easier to do if you are always on the right side of the work. If you're, especially with color work, when you're working on the wrong side and you have all those floats and stuff, it can be very hard. And so she explains this very clearly in this book, and it explains exactly where to put these steek stitches, which I haven't knit one of these yet, but I think I'd really like to try it. It looks like a lot of times there is about 5 stitches, and then you just cut right up, and then you still have 2 stitches on each side that have not come unraveled. You actually can to make sure that they do not unravel your work, you do secure them with either a sewing machine or a hand stitching stitch. So they are secure, and she says that it's quite liberating to be able to do that. So you definitely check this out if this sounds intriguing to you. Like I said, there are just a million gorgeous patterns. Well, how many? There's 21. So many beautiful patterns and different shapes. Some of them alternate stitch patterns, some of them alternate colors, just beautiful. So that is Knitting Wraps in the Round. And of course, I will put a link in the show notes. Let's talk about books. Because I was a good girl and am podcasting just a mere 2 weeks later, I don't have as much to talk about. I reread a book as my evening, I'm about to fall asleep read, just because I needed something very comforting and easy to read to get me to sleep these days. And it's called Vanishing Type by Ellery Adams. I've talked about this series before. The series is called The Secret Book and Scone Society. And it's a delightful, I want to call it a little bit magical realism, but very light on the magical. It's sort of suggested. And it's a whole series about this little town called Miracle Springs, and most of it takes place. The main character is this woman Nora, who owns a bookstore, and it just sounds like the most delightful place. I can picture it so perfectly in my head. It's a bookstore and coffee place, and she is friends with a woman who owns a bakery, and another one that owns a beauty parlor, and another one that works at a spa. And they are just this group of, it's just a great story of women's friendships, but of course they always get involved in solving some sort of a mystery involving a murder, of course, because it's me. Of course, it's a murder mystery. But they're delightful. I'm looking forward to the next one coming out, which will not be until April. And but Vanishing Type is the last one in the series. So I may I don't know, they're so fun to read. So I may go back and do that. I do love my little cozy series. I've talked before about the Notorious series, which is about a woman who owns a knitting store and kind of gets involved. I think that this ones by Ellery Adams are a little bit better written. And then recently I've talked about the Stitches in Crime series on this podcast as well. So those are just, they're inexpensive and they're easy reads. And if you're like me and you kind of need something pretty light to put you to sleep at night, that's your ticket. On the other end of the spectrum, I am still, I'm listening to, this started out as my reading book and has become my audio book, is Anna Karenina. And Frances Dow and I are both reading this. We've yet to really discuss it, but we kind of challenged each other to read it. And I think I talked about this last week. I got it because I'm a member of Prime. You can just sort of borrow it for free, from the Amazon Classics series. So you can get it as an audiobook and, an ebook, and it's got the whisper sync. So you can read it, and then when you pick up the audiobook, it'll pick up where you left off and vice versa. And I'm still just enjoying it very much. It's so darn long. I think it's like 39 hours. As an audiobook. I do have it turned up to 1.25 speed. It's very long, but it's not at all hard to follow. I guess I had this fear about these old Russian classics that would be so hard to follow. So I'm enjoying that. And then I had also gotten from Libby Atomic Habits. It's always a good book. Atomic Habits by James Clear. Just always good to just remind yourself of all the good ways to instill good habits here at the beginning of the new year. So nothing, I think I might have talked about all three of those last time. So I apologize for that. On the TV show side, I think I had mentioned that I got BritBox for 2 months through Amazon Prime for $1.99 a month. And what a steal that was. That is, as I mentioned last time, the only place you can watch Shetland anymore. So I had no idea. It's been so many years since I had watched Shetland, which is a mystery series in the Shetland Islands based on a series of books by Anne Cleves. And I did a little diving into some things. In one of the episodes, Jimmy Perez, the main character, talks about being from Fair Isle, and there is a murder on Fair Isle, and his parents still live there. So he goes to Fair Isle, and his dad picks him up and says, "We haven't had, like a murder in Fair Isle in 70 years." And I was like, how many people live on Fair Isle? 60 people live on Fair Isle. In the show, they say 70. Right now, 60 people. Can you imagine living on an island with only 60 people? It seems it's like crazy. I also, I'm like, why are they always wearing jackets? Like, how cold is it here? So I found out that there is a Gulf Stream thing, so it doesn't get as cold. Like, I don't think it ever snows there. And there's a Gulf Stream situation that keeps it from getting so frigid because it is very far north. It's, so close to Norway. But basically, according to my research, the lows are, now I'm already forgetting. Maybe the lows are like 25 degrees and the highs in the summer are like 35 degrees. So in the summer, it's 35 degrees. I mean, I cannot even imagine living somewhere so cold. So those are my things. It's beautiful. It's a little bit on the desolate side in some ways. But anyways, so loving the show. Had no idea where stopped watching the show. So there's 7 seasons. I started on season 4. Clearly something happened in season 3 that I was like, would have been good if I'd known about. I kind of put it together, but every season's just like 6 episodes. So got right through it all. Season 6 is the biggest roller coaster ride of your life. And then season 7 left it a little bit weird, to be honest with you. But I wasn't done with Shetland, so I wrapped around, started at season 1 again, and I've now finished it. So I've watched all 7 seasons since last I talked to you. And then moved on to Vera, which is another show that is based on a series of Anne Cleeve's books, but I kind of abandoned that because Shetland's a little bit dark, so it's no Midsummer Murders, if you know what I mean, which is a little more lighthearted on the murder side. Shetland can be a little bit intense and dark, and so is Vera, and I was like, I'm kind of done with that. I need something a little bit lighter right now. Also, I started to sew, and when I'm cross-stitching, I can track what's happening with the murder mysteries. When I'm sewing, not so much. And so then I found another show. I was just kind of flipping around BritBox as long as I've got it, and I found another show called Murder in Provence. I do love everything to do with France, so that seemed good. I've only watched 1 episode, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. What was a little bit weird is it's obviously it's in France. It's in Provence. Everybody seems to have an British accent, but French names. So I think we're supposed to be pretending that these people in real life would be speaking French. Like, I think they're supposed to all be French, but very clearly everybody is British. Reminds me of on Star Trek Next Generation, Patrick Stewart, Jean-Luc Picard, right? He's supposed to be French, and he clearly has a very British accent. So any accent is a good substitution for any other accents. They're just foreign, right? Which is crazy. So anyways, so that was kind of fun. So those have been the shows I watch while I'm stitching. My husband and I usually watch 1 episode of a show per night, and we did the new Jack Ryan series, which is on Amazon with John Krasinski. He is so good in that role. I'm so glad that he moved beyond Jim from The Office. The funny thing, so this was season 3. We'd watched the other ones, very much enjoyed those. He's a CIA analyst, and just and field officer, and he just gets himself in all these kind of things. It was funny since we just recently watched a James Bond. In some ways, it's a little bit like a James Bond in that it's like, these thrillers type things where he's just escaping, and he's all over the world, and he's killing people and slinking out the back, kind of a thing. The difference between Jack Ryan and James Bond is that Jack Ryan looks scared sometimes. He actually looks like how we would be reacting in the situation instead of the whole suave James Bond thing. I gotta say, though, that the whole storyline of the season 3 of Jack Ryan was so confusing. My husband and I, and we're no slouches, but we're just like constantly stopping, going, okay, like, who is that, and what is happening here? And we're just constantly trying to explain it to each other so that we are tracking the whole story. So that was kind of funny. And I kept saying, I feel like as soon as we're done with this show, we need to start it all over so that we really understand it after we know how it ends. But that was quite a fun ride. And then we went back to Peaky Blinders because we're not sure what else to watch. Peaky Blinders is a Netflix show. I guess I didn't tell you. Jack Ryan it's based on a story, a character from Tom Clancy. So it's all very Cold War stuff, stuff with Russia. And then Peaky Blinders is in like Birmingham, England, in the 1920s, and basically the Peaky Blinders are a mob. It's a whole organized crime story. It's a very compelling story. My main problem with it is that it's very violent and gory and a little too much sex. You see a little too much. So we kind of gave it up after season 2, but now we're back on it. And it's a very good story, but if it's kind of like Breaking Bad or Game of Thrones. If I could just tone things down a little bit, I would enjoy it so much more. But we're only back to that because we live in this world of streaming services. So there's a number of shows that we would like to get back to. Yellowstone, 1883, Picard, Discovery, Strange New Worlds. There's so some of them are on Paramount. Ted Lasso, all this stuff's on Apple. So what we need to figure out is has new seasons coming out and when are they over, because so that we can just watch all of them and not have to wait for them to come out week after week. But this whole streaming service thing is so confusing. We start them and stop them because we're not going to pay for all of them at once. So right now we just have Netflix. But I don't know. Need to go back to, I think, HBO. There's a few things there I want to watch, but it's just so confusing. I'm not enjoying. I enjoy not having $100 cable bill, but it's very confusing keeping track of all of this. So there, rant over. All right, let's head into our final segment here. I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about, so I last episode, I talked about my 3 big goals for the year, and how this has been, this worked for me last year to have these 3 big goals. And so one of them is kind of, as I call prepping, is really getting my garage and it turned into an extended pantry. And part of that was doing a big garage clean out, which my husband was totally on board for. So that has been very nice. And that project has been going really well. I might have talked about last time that we bought these 3 kind of 48 by 48 inch kind of hanging platforms that hang from the garage ceiling for storage, and all the Christmas stuff is up there. What it's enabled us to do is get stuff up off the floor. I mean, we got rid of a lot of stuff. I made a big trip to Goodwill. Just yesterday, my husband and I divided and conquered, and I had made appointments with our city for getting rid of hazardous waste and e-waste and Goodwill. And so lots of things have gone out, and lots of trash, things like that. So that really helped. And we got things off the floor to the point where the only thing left to deal with is this weight bench that my husband has probably had for 35 years. And I do want to, I don't want to get rid of all the weights because I need to be doing weight training exercises, which, good news, I just had my latest bone scan and my bone density is up. I'm always, if you're new here, because of a breast cancer diagnosis in my 30s and I have the breast cancer gene. I had my ovaries out, went into menopause at 37, put me at this huge risk of osteoporosis, which is now coming home to roost for me. So I don't want to get rid of the weights, but the weight bench is just not part of how I'm using it. And we figured if nobody used that weight bench during the pandemic, then it's never going to happen. That was the time to use it. So I need to give that away. That's the other way we got rid of all kinds of things is Facebook Marketplace, the Buy Nothing group in our city on Facebook, and then just the Buy Sell Trade groups. And that's been really nice. And we sold these little woodworking pieces of equipment, and I felt so good about both the people that I sold those to. We took a fraction of what they were worth, but they were so happy and they're going to use them. And so they have so much space. I love empty spaces. I'm getting older. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love cozy. And every time right now I walk by my total mess of a sewing table, I smile and just go, oh, look at that. Look at the stuff I'm making. So I love a good creative mess. But, empty closets, empty garages, these are also things that make me very happy. So we just need to handle this one thing of getting rid of that weight bench and then figuring out which weights we want to keep. And I feel like part of me wants to just get rid of all of those and buy those kinds of weights, kind of hand weights that you can kind of turn a little dial and they can be 5 pounds, 8 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds. We'll see. But I thought we were going to get to that this weekend, but I think the hike knocked the will to clean that out of us. So, but yeah, that is it's a really good place, and I've really reorganized things, and I'm able to now, just as we're going to Costco and things like that, I'm just continuing to build this extended pantry of the things that we are, any kind of canned good or rice or things like that, anything that we use, now I just buy more of. And Costco's a great place to do that. I have any tomato-based product from Costco that you could possibly want, I have in my pantry. And every time I go out there, and it's so much more well organized now, I just think, okay, like, you're on your way here. And I need to get back to reading my book called Survival Mom, and actually making a list of, if we lost power, what are the dishes, what are the meals that I really could make from my extended pantry to make sure that I actually have all the components of it. And also, I think that's good to have, because if you're in a situation where it's flooded or wildfire, or for whatever reason you are in an emergency situation, you might not be thinking as creatively as possible. So to have a list of like, here are 6 dinners that we can make from stuff that is already in, we have. So that's cool. So I'm pretty happy about that. The other one of my other projects is figuring out what I want to do with this kids' room. And that's been, at this point, a little bit more of a mental project. I'm kind of just wondering, thinking about, I'm kind of looking at furniture, and just kind of imagining what I need to get rid of. This is the room I'm recording in, and I have this white iron daybed that my mom, who loved furniture, she gave me this white iron daybed as my high school graduation present. It broke my heart a little bit when my parents told me, you cannot go to a 4-year university right out of high school. You need to go to community college because that's what we can afford. But as part of that deal, we completely redid my bedroom. And part of it was this daybed, and we did this whole wallpaper situation that was beautiful. And so I have been carrying around this daybed for my, since I was 18. And so it was, my bed when I was single. And it makes into, it's made out right now. It basically makes into a king size bed because it's got a trundle that you can store underneath. And it was my daughter's bed, for her whole life. And it's very squeaky. I mean, it still looks really good, but it's very squeaky. And I think it's time for me to let it go. I mean, in some ways, it's like it's a good guest room bed, but it's not, because we need a queen size bed in here. So I think we're going to get rid of this, which is a little bit heartbreaking for me, but I think I'm ready to let it go. And then my daughter's, a dresser and mirror. Everything was white. All the furniture was white in this room. And I think I'm going to have to let that go too, because I don't think I want to fill this room with white furniture. So a lot of these, it's just, some letting go is a little bit hard. So trying to kind of just, and I think sometimes, when I delay decisions, but I'm thinking about them, the answers come to you, as you go. So before I wrap this up, and speaking of letting go, as you know, my friend Frances Dell and I, we do this blog called The Empty Nest Chronicles, and once a month we're doing a podcast which appears in this feed, and I hope that's okay with you guys. Let me know if that's a real downer. We kind of wanted to see how that podcast was going to go before we spun it off into its own feed, because that costs real money, to be honest with you. And but we talked about, so there's a blog post component of that, and there is a podcast component of the Empty Nest Chronicles. And on the blog, we talked recently about things we wanted to let go in the new year. We talked also about the things we're doing, but the next post, we talked about the things we wanted to let go, which I just wanted to mention because I think that's kind of an amazing way to think about a new year. Instead of always just piling on, let's talk about the things that you can just let go. And then the last podcast episode, we talked about journaling, and that, as we, transition into this empty nest life, this is kind of still, like all the good stuff's not over. This is a good time to start working stuff out and keeping a record of our days. So You might want to check that out. With that, let me just close by saying that you, of course, can find me online at my blog, The Simple Handmade Everyday, on Instagram at Kristen Esser, and please consider joining the Simple Handmade Everyday Facebook group so that we can keep the conversation going. Have a wonderful week.